Good afternoon, everybody. Apologies for being 1 minute late. Hope everybody is doing well. Happy Thanksgiving. It's been a couple weeks since we've seen everybody. So glad to see you guys on. We'll give it a few more minutes, let everybody trickle in. Okay, can you, or Adrian, can you let Andrea Monique know that we are in this link, please? Good to see Marguerite, Levi, Yosh, hey Josh, hey Dr. Berman, Jim, Francis, Ethan, Claire, Dr. Wu, thanks for joining us. I know as the holidays come, it's hard and harder to find time, but we really appreciate you guys taking an hour to spend with us. So let me get started. And get set up, make sure that I can see everybody's questions on the chat. Perfect. It's Marguerite, Monique. Okay, perfect. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first Thursday, it took a while. The first Thursday of HiPAM's weekly COVID webinar. We are showing the new and hopefully cleaner format and just make it easier for everybody to follow what's going on. So this is kind of the order in which we'll have all the information and the webinar topics. So starting with Japan. Starting outside and moving in. So we thought that over their 70 average kind of reduced a little bit, flattened out, but they're back on an upward tick. I remember when we first started tracking it a month ago, they were 1,000 on their 70 case average. They're more than since doubled that in about a month. So once again, continue to observe Japan's trends as we have the Trans-Pacific from our friends in Japan. On a national overview, cases, COVID cases themselves, the 70 average has started to abate a little bit, but what we're now seeing is rightfully so, if you've been following this for a long time, there is a lag with hospitalizations, ICUs, and eventually fatalities, and we are now seeing that increase, that surge in ICU hospitalizations, that even as the cases themselves, the 70 average case numbers continue to trend downward from that peak a week or two ago. Moving on to our state level overview, focusing on 4 major states that I know we have a lot of visitors and a lot of friends and family who live here, visit and return. So Arizona had a slight dip and then a big spike in their 70 average case count. California continuing to increase. I believe Governor Newsom has implemented further restrictions for California the past week or so. Nevada, the 9th island, starting to have a downward trend. We will continue to monitor that and see where that goes. And then Texas trended up for a while, and now hopefully will continue to trend down in terms of cases. However, hospitalizations now, like most of the states that saw surges in cases, we're now seeing surges in hospitalizations as well. Moving on to our Hawaii specific overview, wanting to be more consistent with how we're visualizing it, and so everybody gets comfortable with how we put our data up onto our HiPAM website. Cases per 100,000, Trending downward, if you look at the overall cases per 100,000, at least Honolulu County and the entire state is a little more drastic in that downward trend. Our positivity rate is under that 3%, and slightly downward trend. However, that's something we will continue to watch as we get through Thanksgiving and the rest of the holidays. Levi, I will hand off to you to brief this slide.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. So when we're looking at the latest forecast, when we're specifically looking at the cases, there's two pretty dramatically different trajectories. One kind of holding flat and one going down significantly. The blue line is kind of representative of the clusters that are going on in the prisons and if those are contained. Because based on the latest cluster information, a lot of the recent cases have been in the prison. So it just depends on if those kind of get out into more community spread. So that's kind of why we have such diverging lines right now. And I know we had a higher case rate today as well. So, we're going to continue to watch this, continue to modify. So, these are going to be subject to change, of course, especially at the beginning of next week, just depending on the next couple of days play out here. But when we're looking at hospital admissions and ICUs, again, as of right now, we're in a relatively comfortable space. And especially as long as these cases continue to stay at a manageable level, but the moment they continue to rise for more than a couple of days, then we're going to have to be really careful with the hospitalizations and ICUs. But as of right now, that's how we're looking from a forecast perspective.
Thanks so much, Levi. And one thing to add to that, I know in the past, at least last week, since we didn't meet due to Thanksgiving, there were a few days with triple-digit cases. There were some questions about why our forecasts weren't showing a steeper increase. A big reason for that was looking more finally at the breakdown in the case description. A large proportion of those cases on the days where we had triple-digit cases were attributed to the correctional facility cluster. So when you subtract out that cluster, the background cases in terms of the rest of the community is still pretty constant. And so Levi definitely correctly said that, we're waiting to see if the correctional facility is representative of the rest of the state population, or if it's just a cluster that's contained. So we will continue to watch that. Then Levi, I don't know if you want to go ahead and brief this slide.
Yeah, and this is representing the same information that was showing on the last slide, just with a little bit, just kind of a zoomed in version in tabular form, because I know some people like to see information a little bit differently. So when we're looking across the board, again, the pessimistic represents close to a flat RT, so the numbers in the percentage are going to be pretty close to flat because these are all being pinned against the current levels. So of course, when we go to the expected, with a much lower RT, we're going to see a much more significant drop in cases, closer to 30%. But you will notice that the deaths were still continuing to trend up, even with the slight decline in the cases, as per the expected lag here. So no new information here. I just wanted to have this up just in case it helped others kind of put the numbers in a bit more context.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Levi. So as always, if you have questions as we go along, please put them in the Q&A and we will go ahead and answer them in a timely manner, definitely at the end if I miss it, and I apologize if I do. So obviously lots and lots of positive news in terms of vaccines, and looking forward to Andrew giving a presentation on vaccines. And since we're here, Rukia, apologies. I think Andrew had some edits, so as long as he can share screen when we get there, I think we'll be fine. Dr. Berman, question, are correctional facility clusters excluded because of data showing they do not transmit to the community? Or is that an assumption? Great question. That's just an assumption on our part. Obviously, we don't have more refined data on a daily basis. I would have to refer back to the that weekly cluster report from Doc D and reread that. But it was just to get a somewhat of a sense of what the transmission of cases were outside of what was defined as the clusters. but definitely can't say for sure, at least from where we sit in terms of the data that we get. But definitely great question, Janet. Monique, today was 144 cases that suspected from a cluster 2. I believe, and it's great that we have our DOH partners on as well. I believe around 30 of them were due to the cluster, the correctional facility cluster. So about 100 or so were not attributed to the cluster, and that's statewide. But once again, this is a single day data point, and looking to see what the overall trend will be, not just from a single day. And then, Dr. Kemble, thanks Janet for saying Dr. Kemble's commented that we have seen community transmission from correctional facilities, definitely possible. So once again, we're dealing with a lot of unknowns and a lot of gray areas. So just waiting to get more information from our partners within DOH. Josh, does the model exclude all clusters? Levi, I'll let you take that one, and then I'll jump in if there's anything else you want me to add in.
The model exclude all clusters? Was that the question?
Correct, and that's from Josh.
Yeah, so it's not excluding the clusters, and again, this is really where the art comes in. It's trying to kind of estimate, a proportion of the spread that's going to be coming from within those clusters outside into the community, which is fractional, I think, but it's not excluding the clusters. It's just not taking like those full case numbers representing 100% of what's going to be transmitting from an RT perspective, if that answers your question.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that, Josh, is that there's so much nuance and a lot of unknowns, unless we have very super detailed contact tracing information. So once again, that's where we caution people in terms of looking at our forecast. We do look at the daily data, and because we know that there's daily fluctuations in cases, we don't really react to a single day or even 2 days worth of increases or decreases. We wait to see what the trend is for a week, or at least 3 to 4 days before we make any major adjustments to our inputs. Another question from Dr. Berryman. Another comment, sorry. This is towards Monique. The weekly cluster report was issued today. So yes, I didn't get a chance to read it thoroughly, but I believe it focused on restaurants and bars. And we have Josh, once again, from DocD, who can just clarify that as well. But thank you this is great. Once again, the more questions, the more dialogue we have, the better. Moving on to our 2 science highlights. There was a short communication by Dr. DeWolf Miller, Samuel Lacroix, Tim Brown, and a couple other Hawaii physicians and researchers published in International Journal of Infectious Disease. They took DOH data and they summarized, and their main takeaways, once again, and apologies for the typo here, they just compared COVID case rates for Pacific Islanders versus Native Hawaiians and found a stark disparity. Once again, I think everybody who's regular members of this, and we've discussed this prior, we're aware of this difference between Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians. And then some other detailed information after 17 July, the cumulative rate per 100,000 increased on a weekly interval to about 2,300 per 100,000, ending on 4 September. So definitely continue to increase for July through September. And then while Pacific Islanders currently comprise of 4% of Hawaii's population, they account for 31% of our reported, and once again, this important, reported COVID-19 cases. So that's the first one. Good to see that our data from our DOH partners is getting recognized in these circles. The other one is from CIDRAP. I peruse them on an almost daily basis. They have really good just news articles and other articles that they highlight. But CDC came out with updated guidance. I believe this was yesterday, where they shortened COVID quarantine and added additional holiday travel advice. So with regard to the quarantine, they still are saying that a 14-day quarantine is still ideal. However, understanding that there are some limitations with that, they provided 2 new acceptable periods. First period is 10 days without a test if a person in quarantine has no symptoms. And the second acceptable period is 7 days with a negative test if an individual has no symptoms. However, CDC does note that regardless, people should still monitor for symptoms for the full 14-day period following the exposure, whatever day the exposure occurred. And those recommendations are based off extensive modeling and trying to estimate residual risk. And so for that 10-day period, so reduction from 14 days to 10 days, you have a residual risk of about 1 to 12%. And then for that 7-day period, about 5 to 10%. And a big reasoning behind these new recommendations is hope for increased compliance with the recommended slightly shorter periods. Jim, yes, the links are right here. And so when the PowerPoint is uploaded, you can definitely access the link to the supplemental article. And then I wanted to also update the updated CDC travel recommendation. So CDC recommends, at least for the holiday period, testing 1 to 3 days prior to travel, which is what we have currently with our Safe Travels Hawaii, with our trans-Pacific travel policy, and CDC added a second test 3 to 5 days after travel. And then an additional note is that when returning home, wherever home is, travelers should avoid non-essential activities for 7 days. And that 7-day period is for people who were tested prior to return home. And then that period is extended to 10 days for those who didn't get that test when they arrived home. So once again, these are updated CDC guidelines. And I think they're important because I'm glad to see CDC continue to update. Obviously, Hawaii's current guideline policies are slightly different when it comes to travel, but once again, it's good to keep track of what's going on a national level from our federal partners. So if there's no questions currently for this, I am going to stop sharing. Andrew, do you have your slide deck up? And then I'll give you screen sharing options. So wanted to welcome Dr. Andrew Abe, who's part of the PHAC research team and a pharmacist by training to speak more about the vaccine part, and he's been a regular member of HiPAM.
Thank you, Thomas. Let me go ahead and share my screen really quick. Can everyone see my screen? All right, so today I kind of wanted to touch upon a couple things besides update on where we are with the vaccines, but also kind of talk very briefly about current FDA therapies and treatments for COVID as well. So again, as you know, there's only one currently FDA approved therapy for COVID, and that's remdesivir for patients 12 years and older. We do have multiple ones that are approved through an emergency use agreement. These include a couple monoclonal antibodies, as well as remdesivir for pediatric patients up to 12 years old. Slight differences between this FDA approved and EUA are slightly different things. FDA approved has gone through a more rigorous review and has been shown to be effective and safe. In my opinion, if something is FDA approved compared to something that's still under emergency use agreement and they have the same indication, I would defer to the FDA approved product. Some lessons learned, like we will talk about briefly as well too. There have been products such as hydroxychloroquine that have garnered emergency use approval, but have since been revoked that since subsequent follow-up has shown that they haven't really been working, really. for treatment. As well as today, I'm also going to touch up on where we are with our vaccines as well too. So really quick for remdesivir, everyone's been talking about what's really been happening and what should we take note of in regard to tracking implications of it in Hawaii and abroad. So it was just approved for COVID-19 in October of this year for patients 12 years and older, and that's important as well too. It was based off of 3 trials, 1 double-blind, 2 open label. One thing to note of importance is that the primary outcome was median time to recovery, and that's defined by discharge from hospitalization or release from infection control. This was reduced significantly by 5 days. There's also a significant reduction in need for oxygen as defined by mechanical ventilation or ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenosis, by about 10%. What they did not find, though, was a significant difference at day 29 of mortality. As you can see here, we have a hazard ratio of 0.73 to, hazard ratio of 0.52 to 1.03. So what the investigators and manufacturer argue is that it was trending towards significance. It was almost significance. The thing is, they may not have powered the study adequately or enrolled enough people into the study to determine that significant difference. When it reaches a larger population, we may see a true mortality benefit, and that's something that we could look into. But right now, if we're looking into data regarding just hospitalizations and infections rate, we may not be seeing the true benefit of some of the therapies that are currently being developed. More significant marker of those may be total number of days of hospitalization may be a good measure as well, or need for oxygen. I do want to note too that in many trials, they do define a severe population as one that needs oxygen and a moderate population as one that does not need oxygen. So again, emergency use authorization, there are several drugs that are approved as emergency use authorization, and you hear that term tossed around a lot. These drugs are not FDA approved and only used in certain circumstances as defined by the EUA. So each drug that is approved has a strict criteria of when it should be used and only when it should be used. And again, this may be revoked at any time. As we have known, hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine phosphate have both been revoked in regard to their EUA status. As far as current therapy in the United States that's been approved for EUA, we have a couple monoclonal antibodies. I'm not going to go through the whole list here, but I just kind of want to show you a broad scope of what's currently happening in the United States. As you can see, they have multiple variant indications. A lot of them, though, are approved for mild to moderate COVID-19 in patients that have confirmed COVID-19 that are hospitalized. There are a few that are used in the outpatient setting that you may hear and see. These include the top row here. This combination is approved in EUA for those who are high risk of being hospitalized. So this is in the outpatient setting. Remdesivir that's been approved is only for use in patients who are currently hospitalized. And that's an important distinction to make. There is no currently FDA approved therapy for COVID-19 for those that are not hospitalized. Going down to the next slide just quickly. I do want to talk about the different vaccines that are also currently in development as well too. Pfizer, like you all have heard, 95% effective, and that's been the tagline we've seen everywhere. As of November 13th, use it across multiple trial sites. Primary outcome in this one is COVID-19, starting 7 days after second dose, up to 2 years after that second dose.
Hey, Andrew, sorry, it could have been me, but I think you froze just for a little bit. If you wouldn't mind just starting over for this slide. Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. No, I think my internet connection went. Thanks, Thomas. So again, really quick, for Pfizer, what you've heard is 95% effective. And what does that really mean? As you take a look at the numbers, right? we've had to date about 43,000 participants in this trial across 150 sites. Our primary outcome was COVID-19 started 7 days after a second dose. The important thing to note here is that what do the numbers really look like? For this vaccine, there was 170 confirmed COVID cases through this whole trial of 43,000 participants. And that's a really low rate. Placebo group had 162, whereas the vaccine group had 8 cases of COVID. And so when we're talking about 95% effective, this is what they mean, 8 out of 170. This is a really small number. As we see it applied in the real world setting, things that will greatly affect its efficacy are just sheer numbers. You know, this is one block party away from dropping to 70% efficacy. You know, people are not responsible. So this is really hanging on by a thread. Well, it'll be great to see what happens in a larger population, as well as patients who do not take the second dose, what the efficacy would be. You might hear people start making distinctions of severe cases. One thing of note is that Moderna is going to tout that none of their participants had a severe case of COVID. That is true for now. Pfizer had 1 severe case of COVID in their group. It is approved in the UK under emergency use agreement, and it is filed in the United States. Again, doses that we're going to see are 2 doses 21 days apart. Storage is still an issue. It has not been cemented in stone, but it is at a negative 70 degrees Celsius. I do want to note, interestingly enough, they estimated on their page 1.3 billion doses by the end of 2021. If you all do the math of the total population of Earth, we are short by a couple billion doses. And so this is not something this is not a one vaccine type of race. There's going to be a need for multiple vaccines just based on the pure manufacturing scale and distribution mechanism. Moderna, they are touting 94.1% effective. Again, very similar to the outcomes. Like we see here, a total of 196 cases across both groups. And they're gonna push the fact that they have no severe COVID cases in the vaccine group. But like I said, that number is very low. There's only 11 people who had COVID in this group compared to 8 in the Pfizer group. So we're talking about really low numbers here. So it's very difficult to compare really efficacy at this point. Similar to Pfizer, 2 doses 20 days apart, storage is at negative 20 degrees Celsius. So not as cold. When we talk about Astrazeneca, these are not the mRNA vaccines. So Moderna and Pfizer were the mRNA vaccines. These are the novel vaccines that we haven't seen before, right? AstraZeneca is a more traditional vaccine. And this one has been gaining a lot of heat in the news about an average 70% efficacy. What that meant was that they had 2 dosing regimens. One was given as a half dose followed by a full dose. A second was given as 2 full doses apart. And they combined these 2 pools into a pooled analysis. There's a binary response, a first case of a PCR positive infection along with symptoms. And for this patient population, they average a 70% efficacy. Do I think this is a complete failure? I honestly don't know. This is interim results. As you can tell by the total number of patients enrolled in this study, it's only 11,000 compared to a full data set that Pfizer and Moderna had about 60 or 30,000. So, you know, it's still out of how effective this really will be. And since they use 2 dosing regimens, they may actually suggest one over the other instead of both. Storage is regular refrigerator temperature. 2 doses 4 weeks apart is what we're taking a look at.
Hey, Andrew, quick question from Monique.
Yeah.
She's asking, can you still transmit if you're vaccinated, or should we assume in the models that vaccinated are removed from the transmission dynamic?
You know, that's a tough part. So in the studies, in the phase 1, phase 2 studies, what they're seeing is an immune response, right? So they're seeing an immune response being mounted for the vaccine. In the outcomes, they're taking a look at positive rates. And in this case, I don't know. They haven't reported that. I think I would have to take a look a little bit further, to be perfectly honest. I'm not 100% confident that they're not still able to transmit. They're just not symptomatic. Because one thing you do have to note is also how they measure it. In this case, they had to be positive and be symptomatic. I would have to take a closer look at that, though. I'll be perfectly honest. I don't know the answer to that quite yet. But I would say as a putting my public health hat on, I would say that it doesn't hurt to assume that even though you're vaccinated, you can still transmit. I think that's something that even if the data shows, I mean, I know we're data-driven people, but I think, you know, there is really no harm extra preventative measures. We're talking about J&J vaccine. There are 2 doses currently under investigation. So last time we spoke, they were only doing a 1-dose regimen through the Ensemble trial, but they have since expanded that to a 2-dose regimen. So they're both investigating in tandem. I don't have any results to post yet, but what we're going to take a look at is potentially 2 separate dosing schedules. If J&J finds that a 1-dose regimen is sufficient to produce a response and is similar to the 2-dose regimen, they may push for that. But at the same time, for them to do a 2-dose regimen suggests that they believe their 1 dose may fall behind the competitors. And this one is given 56 days apart. Again, storage is at regular refrigerated temperatures. So that's kind of like the update in a nutshell. The EUA, based off of what I've seen and what I feel is happening with Pfizer and Moderna, they're gearing up for release before the end of the year. They're estimating production of at least 50 million. Pfizer's estimating production of at least 50 million vaccines before the end of 2020. Once they get the thumbs up, the distribution is going to happen very, very, very fast. They're touting that they have a stable shipping container. I do still have apprehensions about how, when it gets to the state, how we will be effectively tracking and ensuring that everyone gets the first and second dose. I believe the recommendations are coming up slowly regarding who gets it first, healthcare workers and those in nursing homes. However, I think that guidance needs to come out a little bit quicker, because once we get the thumbs up, there's no stopping it, and it's going to come out very fast. But thank you for letting me share a little bit about what's been going on and considerations going forward. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Andrew. That was once again very informative, especially with the updates. You know, I think everybody sees the big pictures with updates with the vaccines, but it's always helpful and I think important to understand the nuances between these different vaccines. Monique has a question. Before we get to that, I do have one question regarding, you know, I know there's a lot made about the temperature storage for the mRNA vaccines, but you mentioned the more traditional type of vaccines still require refrigeration. There's currently no, are there even vaccines for other viruses that don't require refrigeration at all? I'm just curious if that's something that they're trying to look at long term.
As far as don't require refrigeration at all, no, unless it's been desiccated. But most ready to administer vaccines will become ready to administer. If they're ready to administer, they're usually at best stable at refrigerated temperatures, 2 to 8 degrees Celsius.
Okay. The reason why I was asking that is we at least, especially in Hawaii, we have a large population that is vulnerable, that lives you know, outside of the city limits, and so trying to think about, and thankfully we have our public health professionals and our clinicians, Dr. Wu and et cetera, on board, who's more tied into the strategy of vaccine logistics. I'm just trying to think about making sure we hit all of our vulnerable populations who live further away and therefore may be more affected by this refrigeration issue. Monique's question is also, do we know if those vaccines had different efficiency efficacy or efficacy, Monique, I'm not quite sure, on different age demographics. Do we know, for example, is the efficiency less for influenza for older populations?
So that's a great question. So not all of them have stratified their data by subgroups yet, but I believe Pfizer stratified theirs by age and demographics and found it consistent among the subgroups in regard to response. But again, the real difficult part, Thomas, too, is that if you remember when we saw the numbers for Pfizer, it was 8 cases for the vaccine. That's not a lot to stratify across the different groups. And so it makes extrapolation very difficult when you're talking about vaccine trials. Vaccine trials in its essence are very difficult because prevention, evaluation of a vaccine, because you're dealing with so small numbers, you won't really see the true effects until you hit the population. And that's something that we have to be very wary of.
No, that's a great point. You know, I think when they put out 96% effective or 100% effective for severe cases of COVID, people think, oh, the N is huge, but when you look at the breakdown, right, it's of 130 cases, and then you go between, and then you stratify even further, 100 and something of those got the placebo, and only 9 of them got the vaccine. So I think that's an important message for people to put out, that we're still, while it's good, it's insane that we have such quick trial results, there's still a lot left to be determined when it comes to increasing the sample size and getting more of the nuance in terms of age and other types of demographic information like Monique asked about. So definitely a great point, Andrew. Question from Ethan. Oh, sorry, if you want to add anything to that, Andrew.
Yeah, and it's important because when you take a look at the numbers, you're going to say they're going to look at percents, right? But those percents are relative, right? They're going to say 70% versus 90%. But in actuality, the difference between 70% efficacy and 90% efficacy in these trials were like 20 people. So we're talking about one big party affected the outcome of this major study. And that's really the small numbers we're working with here. So it's really important to consider that, these vaccines are effective. And I think going forward, when it hits the regular population, we're going to have to just acknowledge that it's not going to look as great, but we're still going to have to push because this is what we have. And that's, I think, an awareness campaign that we may need to push, especially if we notice rates being not the greatest when it hits the real world.
Definitely. 2 questions now. One from Ethan, second from Francis. So Ethan's first. Do we know if the 1.3 billion doses is just the raw number of doses they would be able to produce, or the actual number of people who would be able to receive both doses of the vaccine would be half because it's a 2-shot regimen?
That's a great point. On their release, they mentioned doses and not total number of patients. So I am assuming that these are just raw number of doses. So it would likely be halved unless I see any other updates. So again, we're not talking about, it's a large number by the end of the year, but if we half it, that's 600 to 700 million people being treated, and that's it's a lot of people, but that's not everyone in the entire world. So there is going to be a need for multiple vaccines be administered at the same time, and the difficulty, like we're seeing, is that each one has their own administration window and their own special requirements. So it will be somewhat difficult, I think, going forward.
Perfect. Thanks. Perfect. Thanks so much, Andrew. And then Francis's question, as far as tracking for boosters for the vaccine recipients, he thinks he heard at the legislative information session a few weeks prior that the immunization at DOH has an app that they're planning to use. Andrew, have you heard anything about this, or any of our DOH partners on the line? If anybody can speak to that, and our partners as attendees, if you have additions, if you wouldn't just mind raising your hand, and Rukia can give you access as well.
I have not heard about it myself, Thomas.
I don't know if we have anybody from immunization on board. Josh, I'm not sure if Janet signed off already. I would say, Josh, you're our only representative from DOH, or Dr.
Yeah,
Wu. Do
I
you have
don't.
anything? Do you
Sorry,
guys
I
have
don't
anything
have.
to add?
I don't have any information on that today, but I can look into it and report back next week.
Awesome, thanks. I know that a month and a half ago, I think, DOH was planning on reviving their vaccine registry, and I know Francis, with your connections, that's something that you're intimately tied with. But I'm not sure if there's been any progress with that as we inch closer to the actual execution of the vaccine distribution. Awesome. Any other questions for Andrew or for everybody in attendance for vaccines or for anything we talked about today? Awesome. What? Let's see. Francis, to everybody from Francis, the immunization registry is still worked on by DOH team. Awesome. I know we have some time before the vaccines are rolled out, so I'm glad that they're still working on it. It'll help everybody to see what the rates are and where the gaps are in messaging and access to vaccines. This is great. We still have 15 minutes left. Once again, if you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand or push them in the chat or the Q&A. I just want to say, Thanksgiving was last week, but thank you to all of you on the line today for continuing to participate. I think everybody here has been consistent members, and Josh, it's your second week, and we really appreciate you taking time out of your insanely busy schedule. I know Doc Dia is always your op tempo super high, so thanks for joining us. This is a community effort. We're here to work together and really improve not just the data issue, but the understanding of COVID as a whole for our state and for our community. So with that, I want to, in the spirit of the holiday and focusing on mental health, I feel April was less than 6 months ago or 8 months ago, but it feels like it's been a year. I want to let people go a little early, but Monique has a great question, so I want to make sure we get to that before we close out today. Do we know anything about vaccine distribution? Are we doing, because of our case rates and our success with reducing transmission compared to the rest of the country, does that mean we're going to get them later? And then are vaccines also going to come on a continual basis, or I'm assuming by spikes, you mean by more of like surges or batches? And definitely that's a question I would defer to Dr. Wu and anybody else more tied into the logistics of the vaccine.
Oh, hey, Thomas, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Brian.
Right. So I haven't heard that there's going to be determination of distribution based on community prevalence. I don't believe any guidance has come out regarding that. But the estimations have varied depending on who in the federal government is reporting it. The initial report was 20 million doses for our country by end of December. And then some have also said 40 million doses. And again, yes, each dose is 2 doses per person. After that, the estimation was about 5 million per week to follow. And if you calculate that Hawaii has about 0.43% of our population, you might try and multiply that by the 20 to 40 million. However, the other understanding is not the entire 20 to 40 million is going to be distributed equally, because there's going to be federal distribution to the military and whatnot. So I guess we'll all find out in next week and a half to 2, I think.
Thanks so much, Brian. So Monique, I guess we still, even with our experts on the line, we still have to wait and see a little bit longer for answers to those great questions. Yeah, Andrew, I echo your comment about safety, efficacy, and cost containment is crucial to make sure we get as many people vaccinated as possible. Unless there's anything else, I want to thank everybody for participating. Hope you can use these extra 15 minutes for something to benefit your mental and physical health. As always, we really appreciate your participation, and we will see you guys next week. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and have a great weekend. Thank you, everybody.